Welcome to Rethinking Academic Currency, Collaborative Authorship and Interdisciplinarity. For this, the Information Medium and Society Conference, the 20th International Conference on Publishing Studies. I'm Dr. James Hutson. I will be with you today to discuss a recent model that we have implemented here at Lindenwood University to promote a research culture. This is going to be for the session Mediums of Disruption, Defining Collaborative Relations in the Creator and the Publisher. I thank you for joining me here today and hope that you'll find this quite elucidating and be something that you'll be able to take back to your own institutions. In the recent publication of Great Minds Don't Think Alike by Gleiser, we find that there has been this gulf in the different cultures, especially between the sciences and humanities, this two-culture divide, as Gleiser is going to discuss it. We live in parallel universes, supposedly in academia, in which we are siloed off, one concerned solely with quantitative analyses and the other one with the human condition and how we experience the world. Add to that tribalism and political entrenchment, and we have the difficulty of actually being able to reconcile these different viewpoints. However, as pointed out in this recent study, even though we do not think alike, both sides will be necessary in the coming years as we see AI and automation radically changing the world, and especially as we move into a post-humanist era in which we become more integrated with technology. We will need the expertise of both those from the STEM fields as well as those humanists. One of the reasons for this is that wicked problems are becoming increasingly prevalent. From trend to transition, we can see that these problems that are unforeseen, that are multifaceted, that are operationally complex, those things such as poverty, homelessness, racism, everything that's endemic in society, we're going to need to take and have a knowledge of cutting-edge technology, but then also creativity and creative thinking in order to solve them. The barriers to interdisciplinarity, as it were, come in many forms and shapes that are no stranger to those in higher education. One is, of course, going to be methodological differences, that being one, how one approaches the world as a scholar and views the world, your Weltanschauung, your worldview in general, is radically different. Secondly, the notion that ideas are academic currency has prevented us from reaching across the aisle, as it were, and working with others or sharing credit because promotion in rank and administrative evaluative criteria place such a high standard on individual scholarship, being the sole author of this publication. So the role of the author, as Michel Foucault would put it, is very looming large at this point. And also, even if you would like to do interdisciplinary research with colleagues in other areas of an institution or another institution in another field, the avenues for actually collaborating and then disseminating, presenting, or publishing your results are very limited, since most conferences, organizations, and journals, as well as even monograph publishers, are generally very siloed into what they would consider as part of something they would publish, something in sociology, something in English literature, something in education, but very little overlap between them. Here, I just want to present institutional strategies to overcome this and encourage interdisciplinary collaboration. And in the meantime, as also happens along with this, promote a research culture that goes along with it. As part of those recommendations, we should want to promote a discipline-based pedagogic research approach here, as well as inquiry-based learning. Now, what this means, especially research-led and teaching-led research, is that you should start, especially with individuals who are not that familiar with research in general or the process and the strategy of research and publication. You should start with what they know. What are they teaching? What are they investigating? What are they working on with their students in the field, in the classroom, etc.? And then you can leverage that and start looking at broader questions. And most importantly here, you need to think about what skills are specific to each area that can help us address wicked problems. Very importantly, we need to first admit that one discipline cannot do everything. There is not one epistemological model that answers all of life's questions. We can, of course, answer, as in the previous duality that we mentioned, all of the physical elements of falling in love or the chemical receptors or the biology of death, but the human experience of what that feels like and means as far as our lived experience, it cannot be captured in that way. And so we need to understand that there are different skill sets that each one of us in academia has. Just to give you an example of what we have been doing here at Lindenwood University, by the numbers for the last academic year, once we started spearheading this new approach to interdisciplinary collaboration, we have been able to build a coalition of individuals across 25 different departments, 42 collaborators, in fact. We have already, in the last year, presented, that being co-presented, with numerous or several collaborators in 8 conferences, published 5 collaborative articles, and have currently 27 studies underway at this moment. So you can see how quickly this approach snowballs once people know what they are capable of and their value, their skill set, and what they're able to do in this process. Now, the steps to collaboration, as we outlined, first, you need to think in terms of the grand challenge, that being you always want to align what you're doing with the research that would benefit the institutional goals that you're working towards. Is that going to be DEI efforts? Is that reaching out to the community? Is that the future of work? Is that thinking about ethics, right, in the coming age of AI? Whatever that might be, make sure it's within that frame. Also think about researching outside of your typical area. So if you only are going to be a literature professor that publishes in Chaucer, you need to think outside of that and other areas that you might not consider traditional to what you'd be doing. Then you can start looking at conference presentations in those other areas to get your feet wet, while also identifying topics and collaborative partners both inside and outside of your institution. Following that, you can begin presenting with those individuals at conferences, publishing with them in different journals, and then finally co-authoring books with them. As an example of some of what we have done here at Lindenwood, we began with conferences that I started outside of my discipline specific to art history, and with my role over online and graduate programs, started looking at those epistemologies, pedagogies, and other best practices associated with online and distance learning, and started presenting at those conferences, again, outside of my comfort zone. Next, I began looking at people who I could share research interests with and started publishing on that. That being, how do we address, for instance, engagement during COVID-19 in the performing arts? So I partnered with someone in the performing arts. How do we integrate, once again, VR technology into the humanities? So then I partnered with someone there. So we started presenting. That then led to collaborative articles. As you'll see, more and more different types of departments and collaborators are noted here. Everyone from business to the performing arts to psychology, sociology, it began snowballing. Doing so, we were able to look at what someone's strengths are. And we don't want to think that we have any limitations, as each academic discipline believes that it is the be-all, end-all and can actually address all of life's questions and problems, but that is not the case. Some of us are great at statistical analysis, others at qualitative research, others at synthesizing large amounts of material and looking for patterns, others in actually doing said research, others in data visualization, others may specialize in ethical considerations. And so pulling together all of these different resources and being able to identify them will put together an amazing team of researchers that you can utilize for the common good of your institution, of society at whole, and then also, once again, bringing all these new ideas once we rid ourselves of this notion of sole authorship. The process that we have outlined that has now become relatively streamlined And modular, we can actually move through each one and have nearly 30 studies going simultaneously because everyone knows the different processes. Is first, we get together with the key stakeholders and we identify our research question. Do we want to know how best to support first-generation African-American graduate students, for instance? Do we want to know how to engage performing arts students during the pandemic? Do we need to know the best strategy for hybrid learning or the high flex model? Okay, so we have our research question. Who would be best to help in this study? Well, next you need to know what's out there. So we compile a literature review of what has been said on the topic in the past, and that is relatively quick. So we know we have our research question. We know what previous people have said about first-generation graduate students. So now we can identify our problem statement. What do we not know? What are people not looking at? What novel ways can we approach this wicked problem? So then we can identify our methodology. Do we need a mixed method study, a qualitative study, a quantitative study? Is it purely theoretical? Do we need an extended literature review because there hasn't been enough looked at from a broad diachronic way over a longitudinal study, for instance? And then we can develop our instrument. So are we going to be using a survey? What type of survey? What type of focus groups? What type of ways in which are we going to gather the data? Then we do it, we apply that, we gather said data, and this can take a while and is also a very challenging part. But once that is done, reviewing the results is always going to be very rewarding. And you should always review results as a group after you've looked at them individually, so that you can then come up with and identify different things that you notice that others would not given your area of specialization. Someone always sees things differently if we don't succumb to groupthink in one silo. And then we can modify our hypothesis based on that. That being, now that we found these results, maybe first-generation graduate students don't need the type of support that we think, or maybe that they are predominantly female and white, as we found in one of our studies, which was quite shocking. And so they may need childcare as one of the primary support mechanisms that we might not have thought of. And then we finalize the editing. This has allowed us to expand to a wide range of topics, everything from business to education to technology to gaming and everything in between. So just to give a few examples that we have here, looking at durable skills, looking at erotica and early modern visual culture, looking at how to operationalize a game studio, you can do amazing things and new things outside of the traditional venues that we have restricted ourselves to. So if you want to get involved with this, feel free, of course, to reach out to me, but contact your research office that you have at your institution. Attend these events in order to network and see what other people are doing outside of your department and even outside of your school or college, right? Look at what people are doing at other parts of the world, in other states, in other areas. And that will give you new ideas to incorporate into yours. Look at the scholarship of those that may be of interest to you. Reach out to them and see if they want to partner on a project. Many times they will. And you need to consider the complementary skill sets. Maybe, as in my case, I do not have the ability to do statistical analysis or quantitative analysis, but I am really good at researching, writing literature reviews, synthesizing information. And so I can work with those in other areas who lack those skills. Here are some references for those interested in further investigation of interdisciplinary collaborative research. And feel free to reach out to me, James Hutson at Lindenwood University, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.